Hello and welcome to the Election Corner on One Man Think Tank. Today I'm bringing you my 2020 presidential election prediction for Joe Biden versus Donald Trump for September the 16th through September the 22nd. Now, as you can see, I've already filled in the safe seats, and as you may be aware, I usually will also fill in likely seats that I consider safe. The reason I don't just mark them as safe is I believe any seat that's flipped from an incumbent, well, you can't always trust, won't stick with the incumbent. There are many factors that can play into that, and you never know when they might show themselves. However, the real reason I haven't put my likely-safe seats up here is for a very simple reason. I need you guys to stay on the video for a few seconds, so YouTube counts it as a view. So now I'll fill them in. Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania. These three states, and the other reason people click off so quickly isn't because I fill in the likely states that are safe-likely, it's because it predicts a win for Joe Biden, and really nothing can show this better than we've had a new series of polls out from Rasmussen. Now, for those of you who aren't deep into the polling factor, you go on Real Clear Politics, see the list, some polls are red, some polls are blue, you follow the overall charts and the like. I don't expect anyone with, free time to know the difference between the various pollsters. But Rasmussen is a very good pollster. That I'm not going to ever say they aren't. I might, but they lean conservative, and I will dock them for that periodically. They're a good pollster, but their methods cause them to lean conservative. And we have just got some polling out from them that I can't remember if it included Wisconsin or not, but it showed Michigan and Pennsylvania both in favor of Joe Biden. And if you have a Rasmussen poll against you, and you're the Republican, you're doing something very wrong. So that's a good sign that the elderly and the typically conservative voter, usually in this case, more affluent suburbanite or older, but still middle class, is going for Biden. So Biden has essentially, quote-unquote, rebuilt Barack Obama's blue wall. And I always start off these predictions with this spiel, but I still think it counts. Joe Biden, honestly, isn't really rebuilding the blue wall. It's more Hillary Clinton was just that bad of a candidate, she lost it. I won't ever argue that Minnesota, Wisconsin are going more red, but I think Michigan has really bucked that trend. And also Pennsylvania to an extent, but really what we're seeing is probably a shift that will occur in about by the end of the decade. Possibly. That's the thing, you can't predict that far out with any due certainty unless you can see some obvious major change occurring, i.e. Texas with immigration, or really any of the Southwest with immigration, or the Deep South with the rise of education. States going red, it's a lot harder to predict because it relies on a community that in its nature is inherently, frankly, always dwindling and always finicky. The elderly and the poor. The uneducated poor, mind you. And that's not me dissing them, that's just a case of that's the term we use. So let's fill in some other states now, because that's what you came to see. So, starting with Arizona, another likely state for Joe Biden, this is contrary to how the national trend is occurring, but Joe Biden is actually gaining in Arizona. We're seeing good signs for the Democrats there across the board. And one of the most fascinating things about this is Arizona has a Senate race, North Carolina, Iowa, Texas, Georgia. These all have Senate races, as does Maine. But we're seeing the presidential race and the Senate race pull away from each other. So even if you know it for the Senate race, and I do predictions for those every Saturday, you can go see my last one, we may not very well know it for the presidential race. So while Arizona is likely for the Democrats, I'm going to tell you they don't have any more likely seats on the board. And I'm going to put out a big spoiler right now, neither do the Republicans. So if you want to see toss-up seats, here's all of them. Iowa, Nebraska 2nd District, Maine 2nd District, Ohio, North Carolina, Georgia, Florida, and Texas. All of these are toss-ups, which is great if you're the Democrats. It's a run-up-the-score moment, and bad if you're the Republicans. But it also is showing some weakness in the Democratic previously thought Democratic advantage, because right now every seat across the board except two has just shifted more towards the Republicans. So we'll start with Texas, which has actually, before I go into Texas, I just want to say, when I do my predictions, I don't leave a single state as a pure toss-up. Though I really am leaning towards Florida might be there on election day, but I never do that because I believe when you've got four options, including leans and tilt, you can, even with a fraction, predict which way the state is going. In my opinion, pollsters that avoid doing, or not pollsters, election predictors that avoid doing that, are usually doing it to cover themselves. So on election day, when a state might have not gone away they expected, they can go, you see, I said toss-up. I said toss-up, though, and you can't really predict a toss-up. You can always say a state is leaning one way, or in this case, tilting one way or another. Damn the English language and its synonyms. Anyway, Texas. Texas is, it's not blue. Sorry if I gave you false hope or a heart attack right there. Texas has gone from tilt Republican to leans Republican. We're starting to get some polling showing Texas is pulling away from pulling out of Joe Biden's grasp, and is going more towards Donald Trump. This is to kind of be expected. And just Texas so far, like I said, we can see the change coming, and it's really easy when you can see something down the road to assume it's already here and act like it's there. And the polling is now starting to show us, you know what, those voters which were for Trump and went to kind of, well, I don't know, some of them defected to Biden, but most are going back to Trump. We're getting more and more polls showing Trump with a 5 or 6 point lead in the upper 40s, while Biden has kept that middle 40s percentage, even when you account for the various changes. Now, leans Texas is great for the Democrats. Under Hillary Clinton, there was no chance of Texas going. And in 2018, if there had been a presidential election, I don't think there would have been a close chance either, even with Beto O'Rourke. Now, Texas is leans, and I think it's going to be leans Republican to tilt Democrat over the next probably 4 election cycles. I think, by the time, I don't know, maybe President Kamala Harris is running for her re-election, we'll see a Texas flip to her. But, yeah, that's Texas. In Nebraska's 2nd district, not much has changed. We have a strong Democratic incumbent and not much polling. The big piece of information is we've seen some polling that shows the elderly nationwide is more in favor of Biden, and military members are more in favor of Biden than we originally thought. So this kind of secures the point of Omaha, a typically sort of conservative light area, could flip, and strong Democratic challenger in the House, a frankly strong candidate in the form of Joe Biden, that could flip Omaha. I'm not saying it will by any stretch, hence why it's leans, but that's a good sign if you're a Democrat that Omaha is in play. Another state that's actually becoming less in play is Iowa, remaining in the leans category, but frankly, not the. It's pretty inelastic leans. You're not going to be seeing it going tilt unless Biden really brings out some voters. I've said this for a long time, and the polls for a little bit showed me otherwise, so I went with the polls. I think I should have stuck with my gut more on it. Iowa is inherently the opposite of Wisconsin, a state that is inherently red, but it keeps hinting, it could go blue, and then it doesn't. But it went blue for one president, so now everyone's assuming it can go blue regularly. But we've seen Iowa in election after election, even in the 2018 midterms, for every seat except the House seats, continue voting Republican. And there's not really any good proof that it's going to change for this election. We need some polling showing Biden really ahead. Now, low Republican turnout, Democrats have a solid chance of winning. High Democratic turnout, solid chance Democrats will win, assuming normal Republican turnout in that scenario. But I think Iowa just isn't there yet. I think it's suffering from the exact opposite issue of Wisconsin and Michigan and Pennsylvania, and Arizona to an extent, of there aren't strong blue urban areas. In Iowa, you have Des Moines and Cedar Rapids, basically kind of the Quad Cities down here and kind of Dubuque, but really those two. And did I mean Cedar Rapids? I'll call it Iowa City. I think Cedar Rapids too. And those areas are bluish. Remember that conservative light I mentioned for Omaha? Same thing for Iowa. That conservative light feel in the suburbs and all that jazz. It's just not urbanized enough yet, where you've got that stark urban-rural divide that can flip the entire state, despite the rural areas voting Republican. That's the exact... So, Wisconsin and Michigan, you've got, in Michigan, Detroit, and, to an extent, Kalamazoo and Grand Falls. Grand Rapids? Oh, shit. I can't remember my geography perfectly. Well, in Wisconsin, you've got Madison, Milwaukee, and basically everything between Milwaukee and Chicago is a Chicago suburb. So that's enough to flip the state. Minnesota, you have the Twin Cities, Pennsylvania, Pittsburgh, and Philadelphia. All of those keep flipping the state blue. It's how Virginia went blue. It's how North Carolina's going blue. And speaking of North Carolina, let's jump on right there. Iowa may not be there yet. Well, North Carolina looks like it's going in that direction. And right now, North Carolina is tilt Democratic. Tilt because we're seeing the race narrow and Joe Biden is not pulling away in the same way the Cal Cunningham in the Senate and the incumbent governor are pulling away. But Biden's polling decently enough that it's tilt Democratic because in, I'd say, at least 51% of the time, North Carolina goes to Biden. But it's getting closer, and I'm wondering if on election day this will be a shade of red as opposed to a shade of blue. In Georgia, things have basically remained the same, with Georgia being a leans state. It's getting to tilt. Biden has polled well there. Ossoff in the general election is polling decently. And those are two signs when put together that Biden could do well in the state. I just don't think it's well enough to flip the state yet. We need some really solid polling out of Georgia showing Biden either beating Trump or regularly tying him at the high 40s. That's the thing. When it's tying in the mid 40s, it's a little bit easier to say, well, those guys will just go back to the Republicans, and that's the assumption I'll make. But that's also our last lean state. The last three are all tilts. Florida, Ohio, and Maine's 2nd District. I'll do Maine's 2nd District because it's a little interesting, but Ohio and Florida are the big hitters. Maine's 2nd District has gone from tilt Republican back to tilt Democratic. Like I said, this is going to be flipping back and forth a lot, so keep an eye on that district. It probably won't decide the election, but you never know. So, Maine's 2nd District. Why has it gone from red to blue again? Simple answer. New polling out of Maine saying, hey, Maine's looking more Democratic again. And what we're left with is, okay. I mean, you can't make a super massive call off that. You can guess, but nothing major. So, I'm going to say it's back to Biden. If the Maine historically is voted uniform as a state for the presidential election, despite its breakdown, so I'm going to say Maine's 2nd District is going to Biden. Another area that's going to Biden, jumping from a likely to a tilt, is Ohio. And that's because we've gotten some new polling out of Ohio showing Biden leading with the elderly. But also, and this is the big one, remember Rasmussen from the beginning? And how it really is solidifying these areas? Rasmussen just put out a poll showing Joe Biden ahead by, I believe, 2 to 3 points, and in the high 40s. This is the first big poll that's come out doing this, and the fact that it is Rasmussen doing it and supporting the various polls we've had come out for the votes of 50 plus and 60 plus voters makes me believe Ohio is a lot more competitive than we've thought it's been. As such, it's going tilt Republican because right now I'm going to need some consistent polls from some outside from some, I'm going to be honest, more trusted pollers than Rasmussen. They are prone to having periodic off-standing polls that'll be very pro-democratic, just based on random lottery. But they have had but they've been polling Ohio, I believe, 2 or 3 times now, so that's a good sign that Ohio's getting a lot more Democratic. I just need to see like 2 or 3 polls from 3 or 4 outlets, or 3 or 4 polls from 2 or 3 outlets come out and show Joe Biden ahead. But so for right now, it's tilt Republican, but this is a danger sign if you're in the Republican Party. And speaking of danger signs, Florida. Florida has gone over the course of this month from a likely Democratic state to a tilt one. And that's just because the polls are tightening a bunch. I know I use my motto of, if a person wins with 50.1% of the vote, 100% of the time, margin doesn't matter, the seat is safe. In Florida, we're seeing that margin closing and Biden dropping slightly and Trump going up slightly. And at the end of the day, it's looking like we're going to be having it's going to be the tightest race of the election. Possibly we're looking at maybe like whoever wins it by a fraction of a percentage, or even a fraction of a percent, if that's how fractions worked. And so Florida, I don't know. It has long since been a very confusing state to follow, but yeah, that's all I can say about it. Keep your eye on Florida. Polls are tightening. Anyway, if you like this video, click the like button and drop a comment down below. Say what you think about this. I'm really curious to hear your opinions on my calls on Florida and Ohio. I think they are good, otherwise I wouldn't have made them. But I always find you guys can bring in new information that I wasn't expecting. So please comment down below. If you want to see more from the channel, click the subscribe button and the notification bell so you can be alerted when new content comes out. Otherwise, I also have a Twitter. You can find me at OneManThinkTan1, the Roman numeral, link down in the description below. Otherwise, most importantly, and as always, have a wonderful day.